The sudden appearance of the Tharaki war fleet was like a storm on the horizon, fast, relentless, and impossible to escape. Earth had always been a quiet corner of the galaxy, a pale blue dot that seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But that all changed when the skies above Earth were filled with ships unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The Tharaki were massive, warships that blotted out the sun, their sleek, jagged forms dark against the stars. Their arrival wasn't subtle. The first sign of their presence was the soundless flash of their massive armada piercing the atmosphere, followed by an explosion of electromagnetic waves that knocked out communications and power grids worldwide. Humanity had never seen technology like this. The Tharaki were far beyond anything Earth had achieved. Their ships were equipped with weapons that could slice through entire fleets in seconds, and their sheer numbers were overwhelming. They arrived not to negotiate or to establish peaceful relations, but to subjugate. Global leaders rushed to emergency meetings, desperate to understand how to defend against this invasion. Panic spread like wildfire across the planet, with governments crumbling under the pressure. Nations that had been at odds for centuries suddenly found themselves united by a common enemy. And yet, even in the midst of this terror, one person stood out: Captain Kira Darnell. She was a young officer in the newly formed Earth Defense Command, and her ship, the U.S. Ascendant, was one of the few human vessels capable of space combat. It wasn't the most advanced ship in the fleet, but it was fast, adaptable, and equipped with experimental technologies that were years ahead of anything humanity had ever deployed. But what set the Ascendant apart wasn't just its technology. It was Darnell herself. Brilliant and untested, she had earned her stripes through a series of successful simulations, and her instincts were razor-sharp. As chaos erupted on Earth, Captain Darnell was thrust into a command role, tasked with leading a desperate counteroffensive. With the fleet's strongest ships disabled or destroyed in the first wave, the Ascendant became humanity's last hope. "I don't care what happens," Darnell barked at her crew as she looked over the damaged control panels. "We're not going down without a fight." The Tharaki had broadcast a message shortly before their attack, their leader, General Taquor, speaking directly to Earth. His voice was cold and filled with disdain, an alien sound that rattled the hearts of all who heard it. "This planet has no place in the future. Surrender now, and you may live. Resist, and we will wipe you from existence." But Darnell wasn't about to surrender. Not to these invaders. Humanity's spirit, though battered, was far from broken. With the Ascendant leading the charge, Earth's forces launched a counterattack, striking at the Tharaki warships with everything they had. The first shots exchanged were chaotic and panicked, but in the chaos, the humans discovered something extraordinary. The Tharaki fleet, though powerful, had weaknesses, flaws that were hidden beneath their imposing armor. Darnell quickly adapted, using evasive maneuvers that outsmarted the Tharaki's predictability. The Ascendant darted between massive asteroids, slipping through gaps in the enemy's formations, landing a few devastating blows with its experimental weapons. It wasn't enough to win the battle, but it was enough to give Earth's forces a sliver of hope. As the Tharaki flagship loomed on the horizon, its ominous shadow casting over Earth's defenses, Captain Darnell felt a deep surge of determination. If they were going to survive, humanity would have to do what they always did best: adapt, innovate, and fight back with everything they had. With one final defiant order, she sent her crew into the fray. "Prepare to fight like we've never fought before. The Tharaki are going to learn that we are not so easily conquered." The silence of space was shattered by the roar of energy blasts as Earth's fleet clashed with the Tharaki warships. The Ascendant darted between the enormous hulls of the invaders, its engines humming with power, its weapon systems blazing with purpose. Captain Darnell gripped the command console as she navigated the human ship through a hail of fire, her pulse steady despite the chaos around her. She knew the stakes. This was more than a fight for survival. This was humanity's statement to the universe: "We will not bow." "Captain, they're flanking us." shouted Lieutenant Rico, the ship's weapons officer. "We need to break their formation, or we won't make it out alive." Darnell's mind raced. The Tharaki fleet was unlike anything Earth had ever faced. Their ships moved with the precision of a well-trained army, anticipating every human move. They were faster, better armed, and their sheer numbers were suffocating. Yet humanity had something the Tharaki had not accounted for, a willingness to fight for survival, no matter the odds. "All hands, brace for evasive maneuvers," Darnell ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. The Ascendant dipped below a massive Tharaki destroyer, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma bolts. The hull of the human ship shuddered as a few shots grazed it, but the crew remained steady. Darnell's eyes locked onto the view screen, watching the Tharaki fleet's movements with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The invaders were learning, adapting, but she would not let them win. "Deploy decoys," Darnell commanded, her voice unwavering. "Let's make them chase ghosts." Lieutenant Rico quickly activated the ship's automated decoy drones, small, fast-moving devices that emitted false energy signatures. As the decoys scattered, the Tharaki ships hesitated, momentarily distracted by the fake readings. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought Earth's forces valuable time. "We're breaking through, Captain," reported Ensign Liu from the communications deck. "The enemy's concentrated fire is weakening. We've damaged their lead destroyer." Darnell couldn't afford to relax, but she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The Tharaki were formidable, but they were not invincible. She had to keep the momentum going. "All units, target their engines," she barked. "If we take out their propulsion, they'll be sitting ducks." The human fleet shifted its focus, coordinating in a synchronized ballet of gunfire and precision strikes. The first Tharaki ship fell, a colossal vessel that had been leading the charge. With its engines disabled, it drifted helplessly through space, leaving a trail of debris behind. For a fleeting moment, the Tharaki paused. Then they regrouped, launching a counterattack with overwhelming fury. Suddenly, the Ascendant's sensors beeped with urgency. A massive blast of energy tore through the void, impacting the ship's shields with enough force to send a ripple of shock through the crew. The shields held, but the strain was visible. The Tharaki had unleashed something new, an experimental weapon of their own. "Captain," Lieutenant Rico shouted, "their new weapon is destabilizing our shields. We can't keep taking hits like this." Darnell's jaw tightened. The odds were growing slimmer with every passing moment, but she wasn't about to back down. She quickly issued a new command. "Engage hyperdrive, now. Let's get in close and finish this." With a sudden burst of speed, the Ascendant rocketed toward the heart of the Tharaki formation. The massive Tharaki warships towered before them, their weapons charging for another devastating strike. Darnell held her breath, counting down the seconds. "Now," she shouted. The Ascendant executed a near-impossible maneuver, ducking beneath the nose of an enemy destroyer and appearing directly beneath its belly. The alien ship had no time to react as the Ascendant unleashed its full arsenal of weapons, tearing through the underbelly of the Tharaki vessel. Sparks flew as the destroyer exploded in a spectacular fireball, its wreckage scattering across the void. The human fleet roared in unison as their morale soared. The battle was far from won, but the first true victory for humanity had been struck. The Tharaki weren't just facing a species of primitive beings, they were facing something more dangerous, a species that would fight until the very end. Yet, the Tharaki weren't retreating. Their counteroffensive grew even fiercer. This battle was only the beginning, and humanity had yet to truly see the depths of the Tharaki's power. "Prepare for the next wave," Darnell muttered, her eyes steely. "We've only just begun." The aftermath of the battle left Earth's forces battered but not broken. Humanity had landed its first significant blow against the Tharaki, but they knew they couldn't win this war alone. Earth's defenses had been pushed to their limits, and it was clear that survival depended on finding allies. Any allies who were willing to fight alongside them. Captain Darnell stood on the bridge of the Ascendant, staring out at the remnants of the Tharaki fleet. Their retreat was only temporary, and she knew the enemy would return stronger, more ruthless. The Tharaki weren't just a threat to Earth, they were a threat to the entire galaxy. "We need more firepower," Darnell said quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "We need to find anyone who will stand with us." Her voice echoed through the quiet command center. The room was filled with tension as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the Tharaki they had to worry about. It was the unknown. The galaxy was vast, and they had no idea who could be trusted. "Captain," said Lieutenant Rico, breaking the silence. "There's a signal. Weak, but it's not from the Tharaki." Darnell turned, her brow furrowing. "Track it. Let's see who it is." Moments later, the comms officer, Ensign Liu, spoke up. "Captain, it's coming from the Eulin system, a small star system on the edge of the galaxy. No known Tharaki presence there." "Is it a trap?" Darnell asked, suspicious. Her mind was on high alert. The Tharaki had spies everywhere, and it was entirely possible this was another trick to lure them into an ambush. "We can't be sure," Liu replied, "but the signal's frequency matches a code used by the Eulin, an ancient, peaceful race of aliens. It's a distress call." Darnell's eyes narrowed. The Eulin had been one of the many civilizations subjugated by the Tharaki centuries ago, their homeworld stripped of its resources and turned into a slave colony. Rumors had long circulated that a resistance group of Eulin survivors had been fighting back, but no one knew for certain. "We're going," Darnell said firmly. "Prepare the fleet for a jump to the Eulin system. We'll need every ally we can get." As Earth's fleet made the jump through hyperspace, the tension on board the Ascendant was palpable. Every officer knew the risks. They could be walking into a trap, or worse, they could be the Eulin's last hope. But there was no choice. Earth needed allies if it was going to survive the Tharaki. The journey took hours, and during that time, Darnell couldn't help but replay the events of the battle. The Tharaki were relentless, and their weapons were devastating. Humanity's hope had never seemed so fragile. But as they approached the Eulin system, a glimmer of hope sparked in her chest. A small flotilla of ships appeared from the dark, moving cautiously toward the human fleet. The vessels were unlike anything Darnell had seen before, sleek and elegant, with intricate designs that seemed to glow with an ethereal light. They were Eulin ships, and they were alive, their structures pulsating with energy. When the first Eulin ship hailed them, the voice that came through the comms was soft, almost musical, yet filled with quiet strength. "This is Ambassador Talissa of the Eulin Resistance. We have waited long for this day, Captain Darnell. You are not alone." Darnell's heart lifted. The Eulin had answered the call. Ambassador Talissa appeared on the screen, a being of shimmering silver skin and large expressive eyes. Her people's resilience shone through even in her somber expression. "You are the first to reach out," Talissa continued. "The Tharaki thought they had wiped us out long ago, but we are not so easily extinguished. We have weapons that could give you an advantage, ancient Eulin technology that is beyond their comprehension." Darnell's eyes widened. This was it. This was what they needed to turn the tide. "We'll take whatever help you can offer." "Then it is time for the galaxy to unite," Talissa said, her tone filled with quiet resolve. "The Tharaki will fall, not just to the strength of a single world, but to the strength of all who resist their tyranny." As the Eulin ships joined the human fleet, the first true signs of an alliance began to take shape. The Eulin's advanced technology, including their organic weapon systems and psychic communications, would provide a crucial edge in the war against the Tharaki. But Darnell knew that this alliance would be fragile. It would take time to trust fully. And the Tharaki were always watching, always ready to strike. Ambassador Talissa, with her calm wisdom, gave Darnell a long, knowing look. "There is much we must teach each other. The Theraki will soon know that they are no longer the only ones who hold the power. Darnell smiled grimly. Then let's make sure they understand that we've only just begun. The alliance between Earth and the Eolin was still fragile, but the shared sense of urgency had already begun to forge a bond. Captain Darnell stood on the bridge of the Ascendant, staring out at the flotilla of Eolin ships, now arrayed alongside the human fleet. The view was breathtaking. Dozens of ships, their shimmering, organic hulls glowing softly in the deep black of space, forming a wall of resistance that humanity had only dreamed of. It was a sight that gave Darnell a sense of hope, a feeling she hadn't had since the Theraki first appeared in Earth's skies. Beside her, Ambassador Talissa stood, observing the same scene. The Eolin leader had become something of an enigma to Darnell, calm, calculating, and intensely intelligent. She could feel the weight of centuries of struggle in the woman's every word, in the quiet strength she exuded. "We are ready," Talissa said, breaking the silence. Her voice was measured, but there was an undeniable spark in her eyes. "The Theraki will not expect this." Darnell nodded, her gaze shifting to the glowing holographic map projected before them. It displayed the Theraki fleet, still regrouping after the humans' initial strike. They were already planning their next wave, this time with even more firepower. The Theraki were learning, adapting, and they would be even more ruthless than before. "We've studied their tactics," Darnell replied, her voice firm. "They're predictable, for all their power. They'll come at us in waves, trying to overwhelm us. But if we can hit them fast, catch them off guard with their own weakness, we can win." Talissa stepped forward, touching the holographic map with a slender finger. "Our ancient weapons will give you the edge you need. We can strike from within their ranks, with technology they cannot comprehend. But we will need precision." "We'll get it done," Darnell said, her mind already racing with strategies. "I'll lead the Ascendant into their fleet's heart. Once we're in position, you launch your weapons. We'll create chaos, break their formation. They'll think they've overwhelmed us. And then, boom, we strike hard." As the two leaders spoke, the human fleet and the Eolin flotilla prepared for their first combined assault. The Ascendant would be the tip of the spear, the distraction that drew the Theraki's fire, while the Eolin ships would use their organic weapons, biologically enhanced projectiles that could disintegrate an enemy ship's hull from the inside, to cripple the Theraki fleet. The time had come. The Ascendant blasted out of the hangar bay, followed by several human warships. The sleek Eolin vessels, their surfaces shimmering with strange, organic energy, moved in perfect formation behind them. The fleet's new alliance was an awe-inspiring sight, a blend of humanity's raw determination and the otherworldly elegance of the Eolin technology. "Captain, all systems are green," reported Rico, his voice steady as he monitored the systems. "Take us in," Darnell commanded. The ship accelerated toward the Theraki formation, which was already advancing toward Earth's defenses. The Theraki ships were massive, looming and intimidating, their dark metal surfaces glinting in the cold light of the distant stars. They moved with deadly purpose, their weapons primed for the inevitable retaliation. As the Ascendant and its allies pushed deeper into enemy space, Darnell could feel her pulse quicken. The Theraki didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a trap. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Darnell shouted as the first barrage of plasma fire struck the Ascendant's shields. The human ship swerved, narrowly avoiding the enemy shots. The Eolin ships hung back for now, silent and waiting. The Theraki ships began to focus their fire on the Ascendant, the larger target. Darnell gritted her teeth, knowing the risk. She had to lead them away from the Eolin vessels until the trap was set. "Brace for impact." Rico called out as another round of plasma fire exploded against the shields. The ship rattled violently, but the shield held strong, glowing brightly with the energy it absorbed. "Now, Ambassador," Darnell ordered, locking her gaze on the nearest Theraki dreadnought. With a fluid motion, Talissa activated the Eolin weapon systems. The Elan ships unleashed a barrage of strange, organic missiles, sinewy, pulsing projectiles that arced toward the Tharaki fleet. The missiles struck with terrifying force, burrowing into the hulls of Tharaki vessels and sending ripples of destruction through their ranks. One by one, Tharaki ships began to crumble, their hulls buckling inward as the biological weapons tore through them from within. The Tharaki fleet was in chaos. "Now's our chance," Darnell shouted, her voice rising above the noise of the battle. "Push forward." With the Tharaki disoriented and reeling from the Elan attack, the human fleet surged forward, launching everything they had. The Ascendant led the charge, its weapons firing with deadly accuracy, ripping through the damaged Tharaki vessels. The once feared invaders were now struggling to regroup. As the Tharaki flagship loomed on the horizon, its massive weapons charging for a final strike, Darnell knew this battle wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of true hope. Humanity, with its new allies, was ready for what came next. The alliance between Earth and the Elan was still fragile, but the shared sense of urgency had already begun to forge a bond. Captain Darnell stood on the bridge of the Ascendant, staring out at the flotilla of Elan ships now arrayed alongside the human fleet. The view was breathtaking. Dozens of ships, their shimmering, organic hulls glowing softly in the deep black of space, forming a wall of resistance that humanity had only dreamed of. It was a sight that gave Darnell a sense of hope, a feeling she hadn't had since the Tharaki first appeared in Earth's skies. Beside her, Ambassador Talissa stood, observing the same scene. The Elan leader had become something of an enigma to Darnell, calm, calculating, and intensely intelligent. She could feel the weight of centuries of struggle in the woman's every word, in the quiet strength she exuded. "We are ready," Talissa said, breaking the silence. Her voice was measured, but there was an undeniable spark in her eyes. "The Tharaki will not expect this." Darnell nodded, her gaze shifting to the glowing holographic map projected before them. It displayed the Tharaki fleet, still regrouping after the humans' initial strike. They were already planning their next wave, this time with even more firepower. The Tharaki were learning, adapting, and they would be even more ruthless than before. "We've studied their tactics," Darnell replied, her voice firm. "They're predictable, for all their power. They'll come at us in waves, trying to overwhelm us. But if we can hit them fast, catch them off guard with their own weakness, we can win." Talissa stepped forward, touching the holographic map with a slender finger. "Our ancient weapons will give you the edge you need. We can strike from within their ranks, with technology they cannot comprehend. But we will need precision." "We'll get it done," Darnell said, her mind already racing with strategies. "I'll lead the Ascendant into their fleet's heart. Once we're in position, you launch your weapons. We'll create chaos, break their formation. They'll think they've overwhelmed us. And then, boom, we strike hard." As the two leaders spoke, the human fleet and the Elan flotilla prepared for their first combined assault. The Ascendant would be the tip of the spear, the distraction that drew the Tharaki's fire, while the Elan ships would use their organic weapons, biologically enhanced projectiles that could disintegrate an enemy ship's hull from the inside, to cripple the Tharaki fleet. The time had come. The Ascendant blasted out of the hangar bay, followed by several human warships. The sleek Elan vessels, their surfaces shimmering with strange, organic energy, moved in perfect formation behind them. The fleet's new alliance was an awe-inspiring sight, a blend of humanity's raw determination and the otherworldly elegance of the Elan technology. "Captain, all systems are green," reported Rico, his voice steady as he monitored the systems. "Take us in," Darnell commanded. The ship accelerated toward the Tharaki formation, which was already advancing toward Earth's defenses. The Tharaki ships were massive, looming and intimidating, their dark metal surfaces glinting in the cold light of the distant stars. They moved with deadly purpose, their weapons primed for the inevitable retaliation. As the Ascendant and its allies pushed deeper into enemy space, Darnell could feel her pulse quicken. The Tharaki didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a trap. Engage evasive maneuvers, Darnell shouted as the first barrage of plasma fire struck the Ascendant's shields. The human ship swerved, narrowly avoiding the enemy shots. The Elan ships hung back for now, silent and waiting. The Tharaki ships began to focus their fire on the Ascendant, the larger target. Darnell gritted her teeth, knowing the risk. She had to lead them away from the Elan vessels until the trap was set. Brace for impact. Rico called out as another round of plasma fire exploded against the shields. The ship rattled violently, but the shield held strong, glowing brightly with the energy it absorbed. "Now, Ambassador," Darnell ordered, locking her gaze on the nearest Tharaki dreadnought. With a fluid motion, Talissa activated the Elan weapon systems. The Elan ships unleashed a barrage of strange, organic missiles, sinewy, pulsing projectiles that arced toward the Tharaki fleet. The missiles struck with terrifying force, burrowing into the hulls of Tharaki vessels and sending ripples of destruction through their ranks. One by one, Tharaki ships began to crumble, their hulls buckling inward as the biological weapons tore through them from within. The Tharaki fleet was in chaos. "Now's our chance," Darnell shouted, her voice rising above the noise of the battle. "Push forward." With the Tharaki disoriented and reeling from the Elan attack, the human fleet surged forward, launching everything they had. The Ascendant led the charge, its weapons firing with deadly accuracy, ripping through the damaged Tharaki vessels. The once feared invaders were now struggling to regroup. As the Tharaki flagship loomed on the horizon, its massive weapons charging for a final strike, Darnell knew this battle wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of true hope. Humanity, with its new allies, was ready for what came next. The destruction of the Tharaki flagship was a monumental victory, but Darnell knew it was only a temporary respite. The Tharaki fleet was still vast, and their remaining warships were formidable. For the first time in the conflict, humanity had been handed a victory, but now, the true scale of the challenge ahead became painfully clear. The Tharaki were not a race that would simply fade into the shadows after losing one ship, no matter how powerful it was. On the bridge of the Ascendant, Darnell stood at the front, her mind working through the possibilities. The Tharaki fleet was already regrouping, their remaining vessels moving quickly to form a new offensive. They would not hesitate to press the attack, even if they had to rely on sheer numbers to overwhelm their enemies. "Captain," Rico said, his voice breaking her thoughts. "Scanners show a new Tharaki formation on the move, at least 20 warships, and they're heading straight for our position." Darnell glanced at the holographic display in front of her, showing the Tharaki's new tactical formation. It was a response to their loss, a show of force meant to intimidate and retaliate. "We don't have the luxury of time," Darnell said grimly. "Prepare all ships for engagement. This is it. If we don't stop them now, they'll hit Earth with everything they have." Talissa, who had been silent beside her, spoke up, her voice steady yet laced with sorrow. "Our people have suffered for too long at the hands of the Tharaki. This fight, it's not just for your world, Captain. It's for the entire galaxy." Darnell nodded, her gaze unwavering. The Elan had been enslaved for centuries, and they had paid dearly for the hope of freedom. Their alliance with humanity was born of shared suffering and the desperate need for survival. The Tharaki had shown no mercy, and now humanity would show none in return. "We'll give them everything we have," Darnell said. "This time, we fight to win." The Ascendant and the Elan flotilla moved into position, their hulls glowing brightly as they powered up their weapons. The human fleet's ships had taken considerable damage, but they had been reinforced with Elan technology, making them stronger than ever. The warships shimmered with new energy, their once crippled systems now fully operational and ready for battle. "We'll have to be quick," Rico said, his fingers flying across the controls. Their formation is designed to overwhelm. If we don't break it apart immediately, we'll be fighting a losing battle. We've been here before, Darnell said, her voice filled with confidence despite the looming danger. We can't afford to hesitate. We strike fast and hard. The Tharaki fleet came into view, its ships looming large against the backdrop of stars. They were an intimidating sight, massive, dark vessels with gleaming weapons primed and ready. But Darnell could see their weakness. Their ships were arranged in a tight formation, a show of strength, but also of vulnerability. If they could break through that formation, they would have a chance. Now, Darnell commanded, focus all fire on their lid ships. We need to break their front line. The Ascendant and the Elan ships unleashed a barrage of energy, pulse cannons, and torpedoes, ripping through the Tharaki formation. The enemy vessels staggered as their shields buckled under the onslaught, but the Tharaki didn't falter. They retaliated with a barrage of their own, their weapons streaking across space toward the human fleet. The Ascendant swerved to avoid a deadly blast, but several smaller ships in the human fleet weren't so lucky. Explosions lit up the darkness, sending plumes of debris and fire into the void. The battle was ferocious, each side determined to claim victory at any cost. Hold the line, Darnell shouted, gripping the command console as the Ascendant buckled under another blast. Push through. Talissa's ships darted in and out of the Tharaki formation with impossible speed, their organic weapons tearing into the Tharaki warships. Each strike sent shockwaves of destruction through their ranks, causing massive explosions and disabling several vessels. The Elan's tactics were efficient, surgical, their ships weaving in and out like a fluid dance. The Tharaki didn't have the agility to match their movements, and it began to show. But the Tharaki retaliated with a fury that matched their cruelty. One of their massive dreadnoughts, its weapons glowing ominously, locked onto the Ascendant. "Captain," Rico called urgently. "They're targeting us with a direct shot. It's too powerful to evade." Darnell's heart raced, but her mind was clear. This was the moment, her moment, to ensure the survival of humanity. She reached out, steadying her breath, and gave the order that would define the outcome of the battle. "Prepare the pulse cannon. Now." The Ascendant fired its powerful pulse cannon, a concentrated beam of energy, directly at the Tharaki dreadnought. The blast tore through the heart of the enemy ship, ripping it apart in a dazzling explosion of light and debris. The Tharaki flagship staggered, its weapons faltering. "We've done it," Darnell whispered, a rare smile flickering across her face. "Now, let's finish it." With their leadership shaken and their forces in disarray, the remaining Tharaki warships began to retreat, slowly at first, then with increasing desperation. The Elan and human fleets moved in to finish the fight, their firepower relentless. As the battle drew to a close, Darnell allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had won again, but the war was far from over. The Tharaki had learned to fear humanity, but there was still more to be done. The journey to liberation for the galaxy had only just begun. The battle was over. The Tharaki had retreated, their once formidable fleet in shambles. The remnants of their warships limped back toward their homeworld, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and debris in their wake. Humanity and the Elan had achieved another victory, but it came at a heavy cost. On the bridge of the Ascendant, the crew was exhausted. Darnell stood before the crew, her face marked by the weight of the conflict. While they had dealt a significant blow to the Tharaki Empire, the true toll of the war was becoming evident. The human fleet had lost many ships, and countless lives had been sacrificed. Even the Elan ships, so elegant and powerful, had sustained considerable damage. "We've won, but at what cost?" Darnell muttered under her breath. Her fingers brushed across the console in front of her, as she surveyed the damage reports. Rico's voice came through, breaking the silence. "Captain, we've sustained critical losses. We've only got a few ships operational, and Earth's defensive forces are still recovering from the last Tharaki assault. If they return, we'll be hard-pressed to hold the line." Darnell nodded. She had expected this. The Tharaki had been relentless in their pursuit of dominance, but the humans and their Aeolian allies had proven equally relentless in defense. However, it was clear that victory would not come without further sacrifices. "We have to think beyond this moment," Darnell said, her voice steely. "We need to strike at the heart of the Tharaki war machine while they're regrouping. If we wait too long, they'll rebuild and come at us even stronger." Ambassador Talisa, who had been silent, stepped forward. Her face was as hard as Darnell's, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes. "The Tharaki are not just invaders. They are conquerors," Talisa said, her voice low. "They've devastated entire worlds, enslaved countless species, including my people. This war, it won't end with one battle or even one victory. They will not stop until every last one of us is either destroyed or broken." Darnell's gaze hardened. The Tharaki had taken so much already, not just from Earth, but from countless other civilizations that had been crushed beneath their boot. "We don't stop," Darnell said. "We fight for every world they've ravaged. We fight for every soul they've enslaved. We fight for the future." The crew nodded solemnly, the weight of her words sinking in. There was no turning back. They had become more than just soldiers in a war. They had become the spark of a revolution. As the fleet made repairs and regrouped, Darnell's mind raced. She knew what they had to do next. The Tharaki had suffered a major defeat, but they were still formidable. Earth had gained allies in the Aeolian, but more would be needed to tip the scales in their favor. The galaxy itself was on the brink of total destruction, but if they could strike at the heart of the Tharaki Empire, they might finally put an end to the war. But that meant going on the offensive. It meant taking the fight to the Tharaki's homeworld, deep within their stronghold, where their power was absolute. If they could deliver a crushing blow to their capital, perhaps the Tharaki would be forced to surrender or face total annihilation. "Prepare the fleet," Darnell ordered, turning to her officers. "We move on their capital. This ends now." The human fleet, alongside their Aeolian allies, stood at the precipice of their final confrontation with the Tharaki. Their ships, battered but determined, floated in the void, ready to strike at the heart of the Tharaki Empire. Darnell stood at the command console of the Ascendant, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. The Tharaki capital was located on a world called Valkyrie, a desolate planet cloaked in permanent darkness. The Tharaki had built their stronghold there, surrounded by vast fleets and defensive networks. It was a place where no mercy was shown, a place where even their allies feared to tread. And yet this was where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. "We can't afford to fail," Darnell said, her voice low but resolute. "This is the moment where everything changes. If we break their heart, we break their empire." Rico, standing beside her, nodded gravely. "The Tharaki fleet is concentrated around Valkyrie, but they're vulnerable. The damage we inflicted earlier has left them scrambling to regroup. If we hit them now, we have a chance." Darnell's eyes flickered to the tactical display, where dozens of Tharaki warships were arrayed around the planet, shields glowing ominously. Despite their earlier losses, the Tharaki were formidable. But Darnell knew they were running on fumes. Desperation would fuel their next move. "Ambassador Talisa, any chance the Aeolian can help us breach their defenses?" Darnell asked, glancing at the Aeolian envoy standing nearby. Talisa, her expression unreadable, nodded. "We have one final weapon, Captain. A concentrated Aeolian energy pulse. If we can get close enough to their defense grid, it should overload their shield systems for a brief moment. That will give us an opening." "It's a long shot," Darnell said, but the edge in her voice showed she believed in the plan. "But it's our only shot." With a single, sharp nod, she turned to her crew. "Prepare the fleet. We're going in." The fleet, a tight formation of human and Aeolian ships, began its descent toward Valkyrie. The dark planet loomed ahead, its atmosphere thick with ion storms that crackled with raw energy. But Darnell's resolve was unshakable. The time for retreat had long passed. As they neared the Tharaki defense perimeter, Rico's voice broke the tension. "Enemy ships are engaging, Captain. We're about to enter their kill zone." Darnell braced herself, the cold feeling of war settling in her chest. "Give them everything we've got," she ordered. "We can't afford to hold back now." The battle erupted in full force. The Tharaki ships opened fire, their massive cannons firing with deadly precision. The Ascendant and the Eolin flotilla returned fire, energy beams streaking through the black void. Every ship in the human fleet fought with everything they had, knowing that if they faltered, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Eolin's pulse weapons lit up the dark expanse as they drew closer to the Tharaki defense grid. With expert precision, they fired a series of energy pulses that slammed into the Tharaki shields, creating shockwaves that reverberated across the battlefield. The Tharaki fleet, momentarily stunned by the blast, began to falter. Their shields flickered, leaving openings in their defenses. "Now's our chance," Darnell shouted. "Focus all fire on their capital ship." The fleet surged forward, pushing through the chaos of battle, as the human and Eolin forces concentrated their fire on the Tharaki's flagship, the heart of their empire. The massive vessel was their last line of defense. If it fell, the Tharaki would crumble. The Tharaki flagship, once a symbol of their unyielding power, now trembled under the onslaught. The ship's massive weapons fired wildly, but its defenses were failing. One by one, the Tharaki ships around it began to fall, their hulls rupturing in massive explosions. The Ascendant and the Eolin forces pressed the attack, closing in for the final blow. Darnell's hands gripped the command console as the flagship's central reactor began to overload. The battle was nearly won. "All ships, prepare for the final strike," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. The Ascendant charged forward, its weapons trained on the flagship's vulnerable core. With a final, devastating salvo, the flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its massive hull breaking apart in the void. The Tharaki fleet, now leaderless and broken, scattered in all directions, their will shattered. The war was over. As the remaining Tharaki ships fled into the darkness, the human and Eolin fleets slowed to a stop. Darnell stood silently at the command console, her eyes fixed on the swirling debris of the defeated Tharaki forces. The battle had been won, but the cost had been immense. "We did it," Rico said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a long, brutal conflict. Darnell nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. "We did. But the galaxy has changed forever." The Tharaki Empire was broken, its capital shattered. And with it, the reign of the invaders came to a bitter end. But for Darnell and her crew, the victory was bittersweet. The war had taken everything from them, but they had fought for something greater than survival. They had fought for the future of every civilization that still stood against tyranny. And as the fleets drifted in the aftermath, Darnell allowed herself a moment of reflection. The galaxy was free, at last.